I tried beating the Polarities mod in Terraria, but every mob we defeat drops completely random items. This can range anywhere from a slime dropping a funny carrot to a slime dropping an insta-kill sun death ray wielded by the god of the hallowed. Will I get good enough loot to survive in the fractal dimension and defeat the polarities? Well, let's find out. I started off by chopping down trees and then checking the recipe browser only to get scared by all of the brand new weapons that were added from the mod. Upon killing a slime, I got myself an Ichor Flask and a Star Fury. This wasn't too bad for a little starting loadout, and then I also got myself a funny carrot, which summoned in a rabbit mount. Yeah, we are off to a very good start. I managed to run through the jungle, killing every single mob in sight. With this, I got myself a better grappling hook, and upon coming back to spawn, I ran over to the corruption in order to fight the Eater of Worlds. I mean, we had the defense for it, and the Star Fury is a fairly decent weapon. Within the corruption, for some reason, there were also a bunch of life crystals, so that was a bonus. And upon summoning the Eater of Worlds, we absolutely demolished him. But not only did we demolish him, we got ourselves a plethora of good items. We got some decent accessories such as the fire gauntlet. I got myself a nebula pickaxe. We got a worm scarf. I got myself a magnetic helm, which I'm pretty sure is one of the best armor pieces in the Polarities mod. I'm not really sure. I haven't played the Polarities mod before. And then I got an accessory called the Maw of Flesh, which essentially allows us to double tap in a direction to dash, and it summons in a wall of flesh that deals damage to anything that crosses its path. I used this throughout the entire playthrough because this was actually really overpowered and it was very fun to use. I got a weapon called the Desolate Winds, which summoned in sand above us. It was kind of underwhelming, but after this, using my Warhammer, I went down to the jungle and cleared any mob that got in our way. There was this weird worm creature I encountered that I thought was a boss, but apparently it wasn't. If you guys could tell me what this is, I'd be pleased to know. Upon killing another mob, we got ourselves a pair of Fishron wings, making my playthrough far easier, and as we looted more of the jungle, we got better and better weapons. One thing that I stumbled upon was the Pythagorean hammer. I'm still not really sure at what point of the game you get this in, but it was really good compared to the weapons we had access to now, so I used it as my main weapon for a while to come. After this, I went over to Skeletron's dungeon and then used the Desolate Winds, the Starduster, and that hammer that we previously got to absolutely destroy him, and then using the Pythagorean hammer, I tried to clear out as much of the dungeon as I could. I used this as an opportunity to get myself more drops because the dungeon has very high spawn rates, so why would I not capitalize on that? Upon clearing the dungeon, I came back to spawn and we got invaded by goblins. This was another perfect opportunity for us to get as much loot as possible. So that's of course what I did. I got myself a couple of interesting spell tomes, got myself the Holy Light, which is a summon for a hard mode boss that we will fight later on. I got myself a brand new set of wings, and I also got myself a very interesting weapon called the Sunblade. Not only did it make a weird and very cool sound, it also was spinning faster and faster the longer we used it. This was cool, but it was honestly more of a weapon for show than an actual usable weapon. I proceeded to start making myself a elevator, and during this process, I also got myself a bunch of life crystals. While peacefully chilling at spawn, something dropped out of the sky on top of a tree, and this prompted one of Polarity's bosses to spawn called the Star Construct. Of course, since our weapons were actually pretty decent, we managed to do okay in the boss fight, but this was interesting. I mean, this boss was grappling onto time and space itself. He would literally grab the air to move around. One thing that I do have to give the Polarities mod credit for is the fact that there is so many bosses and each one of them is very unique. I built myself a ton of NPC houses, cleared the slime rain, and during this time I got another good weapon that I would use till almost the end of the game. It was called a cone gun, and essentially it shot out these cones that dealt more damage the more mana you had. It wasn't really that good as of now, but once you combine it with the right armor and accessories, this becomes the most devastating weapon that you could possibly get your hands on. Anyways, I killed a bunch of slimes with it, and once we took out enough slimes, King Slime spawned in, and of course we took him out quite easily using the cone gun, and after this I continued my elevator. I also got another weapon called the Radial, which followed your cursor and summoned in a bunch of swords wherever your mouse was centered at. This once again wasn't very practical, but it was extremely fun to use to take out mobs that were not in reach. Upon coming back to spawn, the Eye of Cthulhu spawned in, and using the cone gun, we absolutely shredded through all of its HP, and we took it out with the Radial. By this point, I was ready to fight the Wall of Flesh, so I went down to the underworld, got myself a guide voodoo doll, chucked it into the lava, and summoned in the wall. Quite literally, as I was fighting the wall, wall, one of the hungry ended up dropping a fractal sword, which is a weapon from a completely different dimension that you find later in the game. So using this, I shredded through the wall of flesh, and we are now in hard mode. I went to go break a bunch of demon altars, and after this, upon coming to spawn, since I had the summon for Skeletron Prime, I summoned him in, and using a bow that I just had discovered in my inventory called the Arc Bolter, we absolutely demolished this boss. He coincidentally dropped the Terrarian. I mean, I'm not going to use it because that weapon is kind of no fun to use compared to the weapons from the Polarities mod, so I stored that away, and then I went down to the mushroom biome. I managed to find and pick up a truffle worm during this time, but along with this, I let free a bug that was in my inventory that would attract a boss from the Polarities mod. This took me a couple of tries, but after succeeding, I summoned in the Gigabat, and using the cone gun, we absolutely made fun of this boss. If you don't want to be made fun of, I recommend you subscribe to the Boio YouTube channel, because trust me, you're far cooler when you're subscribed to Boio. After this, I equipped myself a brand new set of wings that I actually just found laying in my chest, and I went over to the surface hallowed biome in order to fight the Rapture. This was an event very similar to something like a sandstorm, but once we cleared it, I thought that was it and we could just check it off the boss checklist, but I was very wrong. As soon as we finished the Rapture, a boss called the Sun Pixie spawned in. This boss was absolutely insane, and it was like nothing I've ever seen before. We took it out using the coin gun, and it actually managed to drop a ray of sunshine, which is a weapon that I would continue to use for almost the rest of the game. Thank God this weapon exists, because it helped me defeat many bosses within this mod. Now we have one thing called the Rapture, which is within the hallowed biome. Along with this, there's also a similar thing within the corruption biome called the Pestilence. So I went over there, and because of this, we summoned in a boss called the Esophage. Using a brand new weapon I obtained called the Diamagnetic Discharge, we took out most of its health, and then I finished it using the Sun God Ray. I always saw this boss and I never knew where it was from. Well, I guess now I know. After this was done, I went over to the jungle, found myself Planetara's bulb, and summoned her in. I used the Ray of Sunshine to deal damage to her, kinda tried to mess her up with the laser cutter, but that wasn't working either, and then I decided to switch to a spell book called the Shade Storm, and once she was at half health, I used the go-to Diamagnetic Discharge to absolutely shred through her. I entered Golem's temple since we had a Nebula pickaxe, picked up his altar, and I summoned him in back at spawn. Using the Ray of Sunshine and the Arc Bolter, we absolutely destroyed this boss, and after this, I realized that we could actually enter the Fractal dimension, but we had to fight a special boss first. To summon in this boss, I had to go into space and catch a bug called the Instability, which would summon the Rift Denizen. I never fought the Rift Denizen before, so I had no idea what to expect, but this boss was absolutely one of a kind. I have never fought or seen anything like this before. Thank God we had OP weapons. This brought me very close to death many times, but we ended up taking it out, and now somewhere in space was a rift that we could enter to the Fractal dimension. Yeah, you heard me right. Like, I didn't even know you could make another dimension in Terraria. Well, I found the portal and dove headfirst into the Fractal dimension. I wasn't really sure on what to do here or what was going on, but apparently I was supposed to find some weird ore that I would mine up and it would summon in a boss, but this never happened, and essentially I spent a load of time just coming back and forth dying non-stop in here, and if anybody could tell me how to find self-similar ore, I will love you forever. Anyways, I left the Fractal dimension and came back to the normal world. I waited for it to turn to daytime, summoned in the solar eclipse, and then proceeded to summon in a boss called the Eclipixie. This was fairly interesting, and I mean the boss fight wasn't too bad since we used the Diamagnetic Discharge, but once we took this out, we had to take care of a pirate invasion, and then after this we also had to finish off the solar eclipse. I used this as my opportunity to grind out a bunch of loot. Once we were finished with the solar eclipse, I went over to Skeletron's dungeon in order to fight the lunatic cultist. We killed them relatively quickly using this one pair of scissors that I got. Pair of scissors, you heard me right. And then I proceeded to go and take out the pillars. Before doing this, I decided to put my truffle worm to good use and take out Duke Fisheron, and then I went to go challenge the Nebula pillar. Using the Ray of Sunshine, we absolutely gunned down every single brain suckler and took out the Nebula pillar. After this, we did the same thing to the solar pillar, but I did manage to die before taking it out, so I had to come back and properly defeat it. I took out the Stardust pillar next, and upon taking out the Vortex pillar, our screen started shaking, meaning that we were ready to take take on Moonlord. I was very comfortable at spawn knowing that we were going to defeat this boss without a shadow of a doubt. I went through my chest to grab myself a greater healing potion just in case we took too much damage, and as soon as Moonlord spawned in, I tried to go easy on him. Like, I was scared to deal too much damage to him, so I was using my less powerful weapons. It was only up until he took me around to half HP that I started getting serious and started blasting him with the diamagnetic discharge. I then also used the arc bolter to absolutely demolish his eyeballs, and once his core opened up, I spammed him with the bow and then finished him off with the ray of sunshine. The only bosses left now are the polarities, and I had no idea what to expect from these. Anyways, upon summoning them in for the first time, I was using the diamagnetic discharge to try to deal as much damage to them as I could. I had no mercy because this was the final boss of the game, and of course it was going to be harder than Moonlord, so I'm taking no chances here. Magnetron is the black magnet that you could see, and he wasn't too bad. I mean, he just summoned in small circles that you could quite easily avoid, but it was Electrus that dealt the most damage to me. He was very offensive, and you had to be very precise when trying to avoid his attacks, and thus inevitably I wasn't careful enough and ended up dying. Not only did I die once, but I died once more trying to take them out, and then I died another time before realizing that maybe I should buy myself a bunch of buff potions so I don't essentially fight these bosses naked. After summoning them in for the last time, cheesing them with the nurse over and over again, I first managed to take out Electrus, and I was super hyped to see that he wasn't going to be a problem anymore. What I didn't account for is that the mod developers made it that Electrus actually still deals damage to you even as he's dead. The only way to take out the polarities is by actually defeating both of them. So the boss fight was just as hard as it previously was. There was this one attack that I really liked that was super cool. Essentially it was like this magnet. Just look at the screen. Tell me this isn't absolutely awesome. This has to be one of the coolest boss attacks of all time, and I really love seeing it every time these bosses would pull it out. But I ended up taking out Magnetron, and we defeated the polarities. What the developers also implemented into the game was the weapon of the attack that I really like, so that was super sick to see. But this was the polarities randomizer. Be sure to check out another video like this on screen. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it. This has been Boio. Peace out.